I had always considered my life to be fairly ordinary. I was a 39-year-old accountant working in a small office in St. Louis, Missouri. I had a wife, Liliana, and two kids who were growing up way too fast. We lived in a nice suburban neighborhood in a house that seemed to say we were living the American dream. To everyone around us, our life seemed flawless, like a picture-perfect family. But all that would change in one single evening. That evening started like any other, a family dinner at Liliana's parents' house. The table was full of relatives, all gathered around, enjoying the food and the conversation. I could hear the usual chatter and laughter in the background, but my focus was mostly on Liliana. Her smile as she talked to her parents, her occasional laughter as she interacted with them, all the things that made her seem so perfect. But it was all about to unravel. At first, it began with what seemed like harmless teasing. Liliana made a joke about how I couldn't fix the leaky faucet in the kitchen, which was true, but not a big deal. It was a little jab, and everyone laughed. I joined in because, well, it wasn't anything to get upset about, right? But then, the comments started to get sharper. Liliana would say things like, "Jonathan, you're still struggling with that broken shelf?" Or, "Did you even read the manual on how to install it?" She was looking at me with an amused smile, but her words began to hit harder than I ever expected. I laughed it off, but inside, a small seed of discomfort started to grow. Her family joined in, and it felt like the walls were closing in around me. My father-in-law made a comment, followed by Liliana's sister, who couldn't help but chime in. I found myself caught in a web of laughter, my face flushing with a mixture of embarrassment and frustration. I wanted to defend myself, to say something, but I stayed quiet, thinking, it's just a joke, it'll pass. But it didn't pass. As the evening wore on, the teasing continued, getting more biting and more personal. I could feel every comment sinking deeper, and by the time we sat down for dessert, it felt like the entire room was laughing at me. The final comment from Liliana was the one that would stick with me forever. "You're just not a real man," she said, her voice light, almost playful, but the weight of the words hit me like a punch to the gut. The table went quiet for a moment, and I felt the eyes of everyone turn to me. The silence that followed was suffocating. My heart raced, and I could feel my face redden. I swallowed hard and looked down at my plate, trying to hold my composure, but the shame was overwhelming. The laughter around the table returned, but it felt distant, as if I was hearing it from far away. I couldn't look up, couldn't say anything. The sting of her words cut through everything I'd been trying to ignore for years. The small jabs, the constant criticism, the feeling that no matter what I did, it was never enough. But this felt different. This was the moment where everything changed. I sat there, the weight of her words pressing down on me. My mind raced, but I didn't speak. I stayed silent, hiding the hurt behind my forced smile. But deep down, something inside me cracked. For the first time in a long time, I realized just how much I had been putting up with, just how much I had been silently accepting, thinking that it was normal, thinking that this was love. But now I saw it. This wasn't love. This wasn't respect. It was a one-sided game, and I had been the pawn. As we finished up dinner, I could barely concentrate on the conversation. Liliana continued to chat with her family, unaware of the turmoil running through my mind. I excused myself from the table, needing to get some air to clear my head. I found a quiet corner of the house, my hands trembling as I processed what had just happened. I knew I couldn't ignore this anymore. The man I was had been slowly chipped away by her words and actions over the years. But now, something inside me had changed. Something had finally snapped. I didn't argue. I didn't say a word. I just quietly left the room and walked to the car, my mind racing with the realization of how much I had been living in her shadow. We had driven to her family's house together, but I knew, as we left, that I was already driving toward a different future. The future that no longer included me silently enduring this kind of treatment. On the way home, Liliana scrolled through her phone as if nothing had happened. She was completely oblivious to the storm that had just swept through our relationship. Her indifference to my internal struggle made the silence between us even heavier. I kept my eyes on the road, but inside, everything had already begun to change. The drive home that night was long and quiet. Every passing mile felt like a step further away from the man I had been and a step closer to the man I was going to become. And for the first time in years, I realized that I didn't need her approval. I didn't need to be the man she wanted me to be. I was done pretending. I was done letting her dictate who I was. The drive home felt like a slow-motion blur, the world outside the car window passing by in a haze. Liliana sat next to me, completely absorbed in her phone. She scrolled through her messages, glancing up only occasionally to offer me a half-hearted comment about how busy the dinner had been. But it was as if she didn't notice the shift in the air between us. She didn't see how much I had been affected. She didn't feel the weight of my silence. For the first time in years, I felt a distance growing between us, not the physical kind, but the emotional gap that had been widening for so long. In the past, I had been able to shrug off her teasing, laugh along with her and her family, even though each comment dug deeper. But tonight, something inside me broke. I had allowed her to belittle me for too long. I had accepted her jabs, her criticisms, thinking they were just part of who she was. I had spent years trying to be what she wanted, what I thought I should be. But that night, I realized something fundamental. I didn't have to keep trying. I didn't have to keep putting myself in a position where I was always seeking her approval. As I gripped the steering wheel, the hum of the engine, the only sound between us, my thoughts began to clear. The anger that I had suppressed for so long bubbled to the surface. But it wasn't just anger. It was something deeper. It was realization. The kind that hit you with the force of a freight train and left you standing in the wreckage of your own life. I had spent so many years thinking that if I just tried harder, if I just did more, she would finally see me, the real me. But she hadn't. She never would. And that was the breaking point. The realization that this was how she saw me. As less than. As someone who couldn't meet her expectations. Someone who would never be good enough in her eyes. That thought settled over me like a cold blanket. I wasn't angry at her, not really. I was angry at myself. Angry at the years I had wasted trying to meet standards that weren't mine. I had built my life around the idea of making her happy, of being the kind of man she wanted. But I wasn't that man. I didn't have to be that man. As we continued the drive home, the city lights of St. Louis flickering through the windshield, I made a decision. I didn't need to fight this battle anymore. I didn't need to argue or plead with her for respect. I didn't need to prove anything to her. I was done. I had been a pawn in her game for too long. And now, I was going to stop playing. I didn't know exactly what this meant yet, but I knew I had to change. I couldn't keep living like this. The way I had allowed her to control me, to make me feel small, to make me feel like I wasn't enough. All of that ended tonight. I wasn't going to keep pretending to be something I wasn't. And I certainly wasn't going to keep accepting her hurtful behavior. We pulled into the driveway of our house, and I glanced over at her. She was still scrolling through her phone, unaware of the storm raging inside me. I didn't even know if she would care if I told her how much I had been hurt. The truth was, she probably wouldn't. And that thought hit me like a punch to the stomach. It was a hard pill to swallow, but it was the truth. She didn't care about my feelings. She didn't care about the man I was. And the worst part was that I had let it go on for so long. I didn't say a word as we entered the house. I didn't engage in the usual small talk, the way we would talk about the kids or the chores that needed to be done. I just walked into the living room, sat down, and tried to process everything. The house felt empty, as if the silence between us was physically palpable. Liliana called to me from the kitchen, asking if I wanted anything to eat, but I didn't answer. I was no longer interested in the mindless distractions, the meaningless conversations that kept us together, but never really connected us. I had been living a lie that I had told myself for years. The lie that things would get better if I just tried harder, that I could fix what was broken in our relationship if I just gave a little more of myself. But tonight I saw the truth. And the truth was that I couldn't fix something that was never meant to be fixed. As I sat in the living room, I realized that the man I had been was gone. He had been buried under the weight of Liliana's expectations and criticisms. But now he was waking up. He was starting to see the world differently, to see himself differently. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of hope. I was finally free of the need for her approval, and that realization was more liberating than I could have imagined. That night, I didn't sleep. I spent hours just thinking, reflecting on everything that had led me to this moment. And when morning came, I knew what I had to do. I had to start living for myself. No more trying to meet someone else's expectations. No more playing the role of the husband who constantly had to prove his worth. It was time to reclaim my life. The days that followed felt like a slow, deliberate unraveling. I didn't expect any immediate transformations. Change, I realized, was going to take time. But something within me had shifted irreversibly. It was like I had taken the first breath of fresh air in years, after being suffocated by the weight of someone else's expectations. I could feel the stirrings of a new version of myself emerging. For the first time in a long while, I was thinking about me. I wasn't thinking about how to please Liliana, how to make her happy, how to fit into the mold she had created for me. I was thinking about what I wanted. I started small. I began working out in the mornings, something I had neglected for far too long. There was no specific reason for it, no grand plan to get in shape or impress anyone. I simply needed to take care of my own body, to reconnect with myself. It was a routine that allowed me to reclaim ownership over my life, to feel a sense of control in an area that had always been mine to begin with. Each morning, I woke up early, put on my old sneakers, and took a run through the quiet streets of our neighborhood. The crisp morning air hit my face, and with every stride, I felt more connected to who I used to be. With each drop of sweat, I felt like I was shedding layers of doubt and insecurity that had built up over the years. I was no longer the man who had allowed Liliana to define his worth. I was becoming someone new. At home, the silence between Liliana and me grew deeper. She noticed the change almost immediately. I was no longer the husband who did everything for her, who worked tirelessly to meet her standards. Instead, I was someone who quietly went about my day, focused on my own growth. She would often ask me what I was up to, but I started giving vague answers, not because I wanted to hide anything, but because I simply didn't feel the need to share every detail of my life with her anymore. Her attempts to engage me became more frequent, but I didn't react. She'd joke about how distant I had become, but I didn't respond. At first, there was a flicker of guilt, the familiar pang of wanting to please her, but I quickly silenced that voice. I didn't owe her any explanations. I didn't owe anyone an explanation for wanting to be myself again. I started spending more time on personal projects, things I had pushed aside for years. I began to read books that interested me, took up painting again, something I had once loved but had abandoned in favor of focusing on more important things. I even began taking weekend trips to places I had always wanted to visit. The world outside our small house was bigger than I had ever imagined, and for the first time in a long time, I felt the urge to explore it. Liliana, on the other hand, became more frustrated. She would complain that I was so different now, that I wasn't the man she married. But in reality, I wasn't the one who had changed. It was her. She had never seen me for who I truly was. She had never cared to. And now, as I began to step into my own life, she was beginning to realize that I wasn't going to keep playing her game. Her comments grew sharper. She accused me of withdrawing and changing. "You don't care about us anymore," she would say. But I didn't engage. I didn't argue. I simply listened to her, but I stopped caring about her perspective. I wasn't angry. I wasn't seeking revenge. I just didn't care anymore. It was freeing in a way I had never experienced before. One evening, she came home late after a dinner with her friends. I was sitting in the living room, reading a book. She had changed into her pajamas, her face flushed from wine and laughter. She started talking to me, but I barely responded. It wasn't out of malice. It was because I simply didn't care. And that realization hit her hard. "Why are you so quiet?" she asked, her voice laced with frustration. "Why don't you want to talk to me anymore?" I looked at her, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel any anger or resentment. I just felt indifferent. "I'm not interested in the same things anymore, Liliana," I said calmly. "I've been doing this for so long, trying to fit into a mold that wasn't mine. I'm not doing that anymore." She stared at me for a long moment, her expression unreadable. And for the first time, I saw a flicker of something in her eyes, not anger, but confusion, maybe even fear. She didn't know what to do with a new version of me. She didn't know how to handle the man who no longer needed her approval. But I didn't care. I spent the rest of the evening alone, not because I wanted to hurt her, but because I realized that I had spent far too long neglecting my own well-being for the sake of trying to make her happy. And now, I was finally doing something for myself. The next morning, I woke up early like I had been doing for weeks and went for a run. The world was quiet, the streets empty, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was living for myself. As the days stretched into weeks, the distance between Liliana and me continued to widen. It was not a sharp, dramatic divide, but rather a slow, steady drift. I felt it in every word she spoke, every glance she threw my way. She would try to make small talk, but it felt forced. Her attempts to engage me in the way we once did, with casual conversations, shared interests, even light-hearted banter, fell flat. I wasn't responding the way she expected, and it unsettled her. Liliana, for all her outward confidence, had always been used to controlling the dynamics of our relationship. She had dictated the rhythm of our interactions, the flow of conversation, and my role within our marriage. But now that I was no longer playing by her rules, she was at a loss. I didn't react to her jokes anymore, and that frustrated her. At first, she would call me out for being distant, accusing me of shutting her out. But I didn't feel the need to defend myself. I wasn't shutting her out. I was simply no longer engaging in a one-sided emotional dynamic that had been going on for far too long. The truth was I wasn't angry with her. I was indifferent. I wasn't punishing her. I was simply reclaiming the life I had neglected for so long. Her attempts to provoke a response from me began to grow more frequent. She'd ask questions, make jokes, push boundaries, but I didn't play along anymore. She'd say something like, "You're so quiet these days. What happened to the man I married?" And I would just look at her, not with resentment, but with a blankness that seemed to cut deeper than any sharp word could. At one point, she tried to engage me in a conversation about something trivial, the kids' schoolwork, or some issue with the house that needed fixing. I simply nodded, not offering any more than a passing acknowledgement. I wasn't ignoring her, but I wasn't invested in these conversations anymore. She'd grown so accustomed to me jumping into whatever topic she introduced, but now that I didn't, she grew visibly uncomfortable. The growing silence between us began to gnaw at her. It was no longer about the words I said or the tasks I completed for her. It was about my absence, my lack of desire to perform the role she had cast me in for years. She couldn't understand why I wasn't playing the same game. She began to challenge me, to push me further, but I just remained calm, unflinching. She would ask, "Why are you so distant?" Or, "Don't you care about me anymore?" And the truth was I didn't, at least not in the way she wanted me to. I had spent so many years catering to her needs and desires, suppressing my own. And now, the truth was becoming clear to me. My feelings had been buried for so long under the weight of her expectations that I had forgotten how to express them. I had forgotten how to care for myself, how to prioritize my own emotional well-being. One evening, we went out to dinner with some of her friends. They were laughing, joking, talking about their usual subjects, work, kids, weekend plans. But for me, the night felt empty. Liliana kept glancing at me, perhaps expecting me to join in, but I remained silent, my mind miles away. It wasn't that I didn't care about the people around me. I just didn't care about the role I'd been playing for so long. At some point, she turned to me and made a comment. It was one of her usual jabs, something about how I used to be more fun at parties, how I used to engage more. It was a harmless remark, but this time I didn't react. I didn't laugh along like I used to. I didn't even give her the satisfaction of a smile. Instead, I just stared at her, trying to understand why she was still trying to drag me into a role I had abandoned. Her face faltered for a moment, and I saw a flicker of something, frustration, confusion, maybe even a hint of fear. She didn't know how to handle this new version of me. And that was exactly what I wanted. For the first time, I wasn't giving her control over how I felt. I wasn't letting her dictate the terms of our relationship. At the dinner table, I could feel her growing discomfort. She kept talking, but her words seemed to grow more strained. Her laughter sounded more forced, and I could sense the awkwardness creeping in. It was as if she was suddenly unsure of herself, unsure of who I had become. She couldn't manipulate me anymore. She couldn't control the way I reacted to her or the way I felt about our marriage. And then it hit me. She wasn't the one who had changed. It was me. I had finally stopped playing along, stopped pretending to be the man she wanted. And as much as she might have tried to deny it, she felt the absence of the version of me that had always tried to please her. Later that evening, as we got into the car, she remained silent for the ride home. I could feel her staring at me, but I didn't look back. She was lost in thought, perhaps wondering where this new distance had come from, wondering how she had lost the power she had once held over me. When we got home, she didn't say much. She had tried, and failed, to get a reaction from me. And in that silence, I felt something more powerful than anger or frustration. Freedom. The man I had been was slipping away, and the man I was becoming was finally free. The silence between Liliana and me grew deeper with every passing day. It wasn't awkward silence, nor was it the kind of silence that was filled with resentment. It was the kind of silence that came when two people had said everything they could say, and yet nothing really had been heard. It was the silence of two people living parallel lives, each unable to connect, both drifting further apart. And as much as I had once feared this kind of isolation, now I found it strangely liberating. Liliana had been walking on eggshells for a while, trying to coax some kind of response from me. She would leave little notes for me, asking if we could talk. She would try to engage me in conversation about trivial things, the kids' schedules, upcoming plans, but I remained distant. Not out of spite, but because I simply didn't care anymore. Her voice had become background noise, like a song I had heard too many times but no longer wanted to listen to. One evening, after a few days of me not responding to her attempts to reach me, she finally confronted me. She was upset, her eyes red from lack of sleep, her voice laced with frustration. "What's going on with you, Jonathan?" she demanded. "Why are you acting like this? This isn't who you are." I looked at her, feeling a strange sense of calm that I hadn't felt in years. "It's exactly who I am now," I said, my voice steady, no anger, no bitterness. Just truth. This is who I've always been, but I've been pretending for so long, trying to be something I'm not for you, for your family, for this house. I can't do it anymore, Liliana. I'm not that man, and I never should have tried to be. Her eyes widened, and I could see the realization hitting her. She had never seen me as I truly was, had never cared to. She had always expected me to be the person she wanted, the person who fit into her world and followed her script. But now, the lines had blurred, and I wasn't the one who had changed. I had simply stopped pretending. "I'm done," I said softly but firmly. "Done trying to be something I'm not. Done trying to fit into a mold you've set for me. I'm not the man you married. You're right. And you know what? I'm okay with that." She stood there, frozen, her face a mixture of disbelief and confusion. For the first time, she didn't know how to react. She didn't have the words, the defense mechanisms, to manipulate the situation the way she had done so many times before. And in that moment, I realized something. She had been afraid of this day, afraid of me finally breaking free from her grip. But I wasn't angry. I wasn't seeking revenge. I was simply reclaiming my life. For the first time, I was making a decision based on what I wanted, not what she expected from me. I stood up, walking towards the bedroom, where I had already packed a few of my things. I didn't make a scene, didn't raise my voice. I was calm, almost detached. I wasn't going to beg her for anything anymore. I wasn't going to try to explain myself or convince her of my worth. I had spent far too many years doing that. Liliana followed me into the room, her eyes wide with shock. "You can't just leave like this," she cried. "After everything we've been through, after everything I've done for you." I turned to face her, and for the first time, I felt no guilt. "You've done nothing for me," I said quietly. "Not in a way that mattered. You've done things for you, Liliana. You've kept me around because I fit into the role you wanted me to play. But that's not enough anymore. I don't need your approval." I finished packing my bag and walked past her, leaving the house without another word. There was no grand farewell, no emotional outburst. There was just a quiet decision that I had made for myself. And as I walked out the front door, the weight that had been pressing down on me for years finally lifted. I wasn't sure where I was going, but it didn't matter. I had my own space now, my own life to rebuild. I no longer had to worry about meeting anyone else's expectations. I was free. The apartment I moved into was small, but it was mine. I spent the first few days simply settling in, arranging my belongings, making the space my own. I didn't rush to fill the emptiness Liliana had left behind. I didn't feel the need to jump into another relationship or drown out the silence with distractions. I simply let myself breathe. Days turned into weeks, and as time passed, I began to realize something profound. I had never truly been alone. Liliana had always been there, but I had been alone in the sense that I had never really known who I was apart from her. Now, I was starting to find out. I was starting to rediscover the person I had lost somewhere along the way. The person who didn't need anyone else to validate his worth. I never heard from Liliana after I left. She didn't call, didn't beg for me to come back. She probably never expected me to leave in the first place. But it didn't matter. I had already made my decision. I was done being someone I wasn't. I was done being the man who lived in fear of her disappointment. I was living for myself now, and it felt better than I had ever imagined.